All right. Hey there, folks. Even though convention signings and other live events are getting back on track, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Whether it's straight up crime, mystery, or any subset of genre fiction, we seem to have this never-ending fascination with crime and criminals and what makes them tick, which is why tonight we'll be discussing killer intent, forensic psychology in genre fiction. On our panel tonight is my pal and world-class crime author, Mark Olshaker. Along with real-life FBI profiler John Douglas, Mark wrote the seminal book Mindhunter, which became the incredible Netflix series of the same name. Mark is also an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and author of 12 nonfiction books, including Einstein's Brain and The Edge. Mark is also past president of the Norman Mailer Society and a director of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. Welcome, welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, Russ.
All right, great to see you. All right, also on our panel is best-selling author Wendy Walker. Wendy is the author of the novels Not Forgotten, Emma and the Night Before, Don't Look for Me, and American Girl. Her novels have been translated into 23 foreign languages. I mean, come on, that's it. And have been optioned for both television and film. Welcome back, Wendy.
Thank you.
All right. And rounding out our panel is Dr. KATHERINE RAMSLAND, who teaches forensic psychology and behavioral criminology at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. KATHERINE has appeared as an expert in criminal psychology in more than 200 crime documentaries and magazine shows, is an executive producer of Murder House Flip, and has consulted for CSI, Bones, and The Alienist. She is also the author of more than 1,500 articles and 72 books, pens a blog for Psychology Today, and is writing a fiction series based on a female forensic psychologist who manages a private investigation agency. Welcome, KATHERINE.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send any notes or questions you have for me or the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. So we've got a lot to get to tonight, but since we're going to be talking about a complex topic, I want to start off by just establishing our baseline. So there's the clinical definition and the practical application. When we say forensic psychology, what do we actually mean? KATHERINE, why don't you get us started?
Well, it's anywhere psychology crosses paths with the criminal justice and investigative system. Often forensic psychologists are doing assessments for the courts, but they also might consult on death investigations and multiple other things. Certainly criminal profiling would be part of it. Psychological autopsy would be part of it. Really anything that involves psychological issues that are involved in the criminal justice system, you have forensic psychology.
Mark, anything to expound?
No, I would just say that to pick up on what KATHERINE said, there are two ways of going about this. One is from the psychological medical field, and the other is from the criminological field. I think what my partner John Douglas did was take the work of psychologists and translate it into things that nomenclature and concepts that police detectives could use. In other words, it doesn't do a police officer much good to talk about a borderline personality disorder with schizoid trends or inclinations. But to say organized or disorganized, that's something that means something and can be used in an investigative context.
All right, fair enough. And Wendy, you sort of been, you were on the legal side of the world for a while, and now you write about criminals. So anything you want to just sort of add to what's been chatted here so far?
Yeah, so not being, having a degree in psychology, but having worked in fields that utilize the materials that are produced by people with degrees, and as a writer who utilizes those materials, I think that you can look at it either in a forward-looking way, from looking at a diagnosis or a certain psychological condition, and sort of looking at behaviors that might come from that. And then there's looking at a crime and trying to work backwards and in a forensic capacity, and try to figure out what type of criminal would have committed that crime based on the very specific nature of the crime. So those are the two ways that I always look at it as an author. in trying to utilize the materials that are produced by these brilliant professors and other people in the field of psychology.
So Mark, is that sort of the way, just so we can break it down, like you're saying, into nomenclature, when we're thinking about forensic psychology, are we looking at it from, crimes have been committed, we've been able to sort of analyze the data, analyze the outcome, and then get an assessment, and then also we can study behaviors with the idea of kind of projecting what we think may or may not happen forward? Is that the way?
Sure. Yeah, and let me say, full disclosure at the outset, that these two women on our panel combined have about 12 more degrees than I do. So take what I say seriously. But yeah, I think what from a forensic psychology point of view, I think what the FBI did, particularly John Douglas and his then partner Robert Ressler, was they went into the prisons and penitentiaries and started, as you see in the first season of Mindhunter on Netflix, and interviewed serial offenders, sexually violent, mostly murderers. And for the first time, therefore, they were able to correlate what was going on in the offender's mind before, during, and after the offense. Therefore, once you have those clues, once you have those indicators, then you can work backwards, as Katherine and Wendy have said, to try to figure out what kind of person you're looking for.
Right. So, Katherine, so when we talk about forensic psychology, are we talking specifically only about killers or any kind of violent criminal, or is even that sort of too narrow a definition of how it would be applied?
Yeah, forensic psychology is pretty broad. It even encompasses the civil arena. So people usually develop an expertise. Like I have an expertise and I teach a course on extreme offenders, also on the method of psychological autopsy, which my character does because she's a suicidologist. That's a term very few have ever heard, but certainly that comes under the auspices of forensic psychology, and in particular with state crimes.
You said a suicidologist?
A suicidologist, yes.
Is that a word?
It is a word.
Now.
There's a whole organization.
It is now, right? All right. Okay.
The American Association of Suicidology has been around for 50 years.
Oh wow, it's just a word I never heard before. Huh.
Russ, can I pick up on something Katherine said?
Of course.
Because the discipline does go across the board. For instance, the first serial offender that John interviewed was Ed Kemper, who, again, you all may remember from our book Mindhunter, or also from the television series. And he would abduct female hitchhikers around the University of Santa Cruz, and then once they got into his car, he would assault them and murder them, and often have sex with the bodies. Now, if he saw somebody who was a potential victim who was hitchhiking, he would stop the car and say, "Where are you going?" And they would tell him, and he'd look at his watch and say, "I don't know. I don't really think I have time. All right, okay, get in the car. I'll take you there." So they would be completely disarmed by his hesitancy to take them. Now, fast forward a number of years to a nonviolent criminal like Bernie Madoff. You might go to him and say, "I understand you're giving 10% returns. Please let me into your fund." And he'd say, "Oh no, I'm not taking any new people anymore. I'm full up." And they'd say, "No, look, so and so Russ is got money with you, and he's doing really well. So can you please take me?" And then after some hemming and hawing, Madoff would say, "All right, okay, if Russ is in, I'll take you, but you'll get your return. Don't ask for your money back for 3 or 4 years or 5 years. Leave me alone. Don't call me." So in each way, both the violent and the nonviolent offender were doing the exact same thing. They were disarming the potential victim. So Catherine is right. This kind of psychology goes to the sociopathic personality, regardless of the type of crime that they're committing.
All right. So it
Yeah, and
sounds. Go ahead, please.
Oh, as a family law attorney, that's where I actually got my first exposure to sort of criminal psychology and also sociopathic illness. And we are trained to be, if we're working with children as guardians ad litem or as attorneys for minor children, we have to go through training. And that was my first exposure to, they used to be called the Axis 2 illnesses, but they're not called that anymore. But those are the illnesses that are sort of grounded in this lack of empathy and and the sort of the sociopathic spectrum, I guess. I don't, the experts can tell me what they're called now, but they used to be called these Axis 2 illnesses. And we encountered them so frequently that we would also have like continuing legal education classes to train us as attorneys to recognize clients coming in our door, asking us to represent them who might be on that scale, because it's very difficult to deal with those clients. And it's very difficult. You can't actually fire clients when you're a family law attorney in Connecticut. You have to file a motion with the court if that client does not want to let you go. And so you can end up being stuck with a client who's absolutely impossible to work with, who is, lies, who manipulates. And of course, as that person's attorney, you have to work with them and then also trying to safeguard the children. It becomes very, very difficult. So it comes in that arena as well, not even sort of nonviolent criminal, but just in civil cases. We actually study these illnesses to try to predict behavior and protect our practice.
Right. Okay.
I'd like to just add, if
Please,
I could, there's
please.
a large spectrum of behavior, characterological disorders and mental disorders that really are involved. I mean, everybody likes talking about psychopaths or sociopaths. I use the word psychopath because there is an instrument for diagnosing that in a way there isn't for sociopath. But there are all kinds of other mental disorders that interact with the criminal justice system that someone in the field of forensic psychology would have to be pretty well versed in to properly do assessments. And that certainly can play into crime fiction very well because you have a lot of complexity with those disorders.
Right. So I wanted to go back just for a second because you both said something interesting about, Mark, you were talking about how Bernie Madoff said, "Oh, no, I can't really take you into my fund," and then goes, "Oh, all right." Or when Kemper said, "Oh, I don't know if I have the time." It sounds like they were employing sort of a technique that, you see it a lot of in sales actually, which is a sense of, you employ a sense of scarcity, right? You have this thing that I think that you want, I take it away from you temporarily. And the moment you think you can't have it, boy, do you really want it. Do you think that's kind of part of what's going on here?
Yeah, I think it is. And, we have, as Catherine can show you, we have organized and disorganized offenders, and some of them, are very unsophisticated. Some of them are very sophisticated. You're talking about a very sophisticated kind of offender who really can sell himself, and it's almost always a him. There are very few, with one exception, there are very few female serial killers or multiple offenders that way. So yeah, I would say being a good salesman is certainly part of it.
Okay. All right. So I want to move on a little bit. So hold on, I lost my place here. Here we go. So I realize that there's a bit of an obsession with criminal mastermind, from the public in terms of just whether it's Schadenfreude or it's in our fiction, this obsession with criminal masterminds. But what percentage of these offenders really kind of operate on that level that's far beyond the norm? And how many criminals are, let's just say, for lack of a better term, which is sort of more garden variety? Catherine.
In terms of mastermind, the ladies may disagree with me. I would say, in terms of criminal masterminds on the Hannibal Lecter scale, I would say approximately 0.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think Hannibal Lecter is an absurd character because he does have disorders that would probably prohibit him from ever accomplishing as much as he has seemed to have accomplished. So yeah, I mean, the upper end of the IQ scale is for fewer people, for sure. Most offenders are in the average or below average range.
Is that
Yeah, I think what
right?
I
right?
think just to add again to what Catherine's saying, you can have an obsession, and your obsession can be so overwhelming that you keep improving your modus operandi. That doesn't mean you're necessarily a criminal mastermind. It just means that's what's most important to you, and so that's what you've concentrate on.
And I would just like to add that in my legal practice, that these are not criminals, but there were some very brilliant masterminds in manipulating the legal system, in very complicated custody issues and divorce cases, thinking ahead, studying the system, studying just the mechanics and the players and the lawyers and the judges on a particular case, and manipulating them to such a degree that it was, impossible to really get to an outcome that was equitable. And there's actually legislation in Connecticut now, by some women who, a large group of women who have sort of been victims of these. They really are masterminds of manipulating the legal system. So I don't know how brilliant they are, but they tend to be very wealthy. A lot of them in working in the financial industries, and they apply their intelligence in these cases. And the reason that I throw them in there is that there is something that is not mentally healthy about them, in that they sacrifice the well-being of their children. They are ruthless, and there really is absolutely no empathy or understanding in them for the well-being of their children. And to me, that is always a sign of some kind of illness that is underlying the behavior.
I would completely agree with that.
I do too. And I think equating IQ with mastermind is a mistake, as she's talking about. There's a concept in sports psychology called the quiet eye, which predators certainly understand. It's observational intelligence. It's a finely honed skill for looking for exactly what you need to succeed and what you want to do. And really good predators have done this, and they're not necessarily highly intelligent. They're just very skilled at manipulation.
So there's
that's a perfect example, which is why the best multiple offenders are also profilers. I mean, if I'm a child molester, which I hope I'm not, and I go to a mall and I see a bunch of kids in a play area or a video arcade or whatever, if I've gotten good at it, I can pick out the kid just by body language, who is going to be the most vulnerable, who's going to be the easiest to take. And just like, a lion on the Serengeti plain trying to figure out which of the animals there is the most vulnerable, the easiest to catch, that's what that predator is going to be doing, because he has studied this.
I mean, I work in, I don't know if you guys know, some of you may do so during the day, I work in the New York City real estate market. And I've done so for 20 years. I mean, and I've dealt with from, low level to multi-billionaires and everyone in between. And I can tell you, because I've had face-to-face interactions with a lot of these folks, and some of them, I mean, they're in their own ways. I mean, they're killers, but they're corporate killers. And you just see there's a certain gleam in their eye. You just see it and you look at it, and maybe you're talking about a real estate transaction, but they look at it like they are going to, they talk about, you eat what you kill, because they use that kind of language. They really are so hyper focused on obtaining, gaining, manipulating, overpowering what they consider to be their opponent, like on the other side of the deal, because they have to win. And the idea of not winning is so, is the antithesis of like their very existence. and it's sort of, they're so mission driven to conquer whatever that thing is. And it sounds like there may be some similarity with what you're kind of talking about here. So let me ask you this. So we're talking about, forensic psychology, and most of us are not forensic psychologists, but what's the specific process or processes for forming a forensic psychological assessment, or at least some of them, just because we're talking about how we can apply this to genre fiction. How does that work? Is it a system? Is it sort of generalized? Catherine, why don't you get us started there? Like, how does it actually work?
Well, assessments cover a wide variety of issues and disorders. So it really, for suicide, is at risk evaluation. I spent 5 years. That's a different kind of assessment. I was doing what I call a guided autobiography, where he wanted to tell a story, but I wanted him to tell it in a way that would benefit psychology, criminology, and law enforcement. So I'm doing an assessment while he's, spinning his story. I'm doing a very long range. So I'm playing a long game. I'm doing a very long range kind of assessment that's very different from the standardized formal types of assessment you might do for personality, IQ, brain disorders. So really, for psychologists who are doing assessments, especially for the court, they'll have a standardized battery that they use, but it's going to be specific to something like competency, mental state at the time of the offense, some kind of syndrome that might be a mitigating factor. So it really depends on what you're dealing with for your client or the court system, or even in investigations. If you're doing profiling, you're going to want to learn as much as you can about what does a crime scene look like. And so what, as Mark said, who is the kind of person who would do this? You need to know a lot about abnormal psychology, because if you see that manifestation at a scene, you have to be able to bring up that kind of information.
Mark?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it depends, when as I said before, you can pursue this from a psychological point of view or from an investigative point of view. But, if you see a certain kind of crime, and I'm thinking of one in particular, and you say, just based on the crime scene, the offender is local, he's nocturnal, he does not have a good job, he does not have a driver's license, he has relatives who live close by or in the building, you've probably already interviewed him, he takes prescription medications, he has not been to college, he wears sneakers, and he's mostly nocturnal. And you say, well, how do you come up with all of that? You say, well, if you work backwards, I can explain each part of it. We don't have time for that. Or in the case of the Trailside killer, John Douglas looked at these murders that took place in very secluded areas around Mount Tamalpais in the Bay Area, and he said, "All right, you're looking for somebody with a speech impediment," and the task force was saying, "That's crazy. How do you know that?" And he said, "Well, let's work backwards." He said these were all blitz style attacks, which means that the person probably didn't have much confidence, wasn't a salesman, wasn't able to charm these people into going with him. He didn't have good self-confidence. There was something about him that made him know that he couldn't, that he would, if he wanted these women, he would have to attack them quickly and from behind. And if it was a physical disfiguration, one of the many witnesses who'd been hiking around that area would have noticed him. Therefore, John concluded that it was probably somebody with some kind of speech impediment, that he didn't feel confident speaking and selling himself. And that's what it turned out to be.
So let me ask, so I think we're getting there, but to what degree is forensic psychology about crime analysis versus crime prevention? Or is it just sort of a little from column A and a little?
Oh, it's both. And it's going to require different people to have different specialties. So there are people who are very much involved in treatment of children, for example. Some are involved in treatment of adolescents who might be at risk for becoming adult offenders. Others are involved with adult offenders. So it really it covers the whole spectrum, but different people are going to focus in on specific types of things. Like as I mentioned, my character is a suicidologist, but she also, as an offshoot of that, can read stage scenes, because a lot of suicidology is about knowing when something has been staged to look like suicide. So
so hold on, stick on that for a second. I'm interested in this. So how frequent of suicide cases or reported suicide cases, what is the frequency of a staged scene, and and what is what are some telltale signs that it has been staged?
Well, that assumes we can spot all the staged ones, because it's probably unlikely that we have. So we really wouldn't be able to have a very accurate percentage of that. But I did work on a study of suicide notes with a coroner once, where we looked at the difference between suicide notes that were written as part of a staged scene versus genuine suicide notes. And there were certain telltale signs, especially if the perpetrator was mentioned in the note in a favorable light. That was always a red flag. That was always a red flag.
I swear Johnny didn't do it. He's a great guy.
That's exactly what, there was one in Britain where a serial killer was killing young men, and he put a suicide note in the hand of one, taking credit for 3 weeks earlier another body found in the same cemetery. And the police closed it, saying, okay, we got a suicide and he's responsible for the other one, so that's 2 cases closed. But in fact, the serial killer did the whole thing. But in the note, he wrote, and by the way, the guy I was with last night has nothing to do with this. I would have, if I were consulting, I would have told the cop, find out who that person was.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
that's somebody that you want to look at.
Right. Okay. So when we're talking about forensic psychology and the various elements of, regardless of which specific role that you're playing, and the answer to my question may vary, but what's the most difficult aspects about forensic psychology, and how do you overcome them? So Mark, we'll just start with you.
I think it depends on the case, and this is not directed at Wendy, because she is certainly not guilty of this. But one of the tropes I find in crime fiction a lot, having to do with this subject, is and it goes back to Thomas Harris, and I'm sure before, probably as far back as Edgar Allan Poe, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Wilkie Collins. But this idea that this detective, whoever our main character is, our protagonist, has the rare gift, or is it actually a curse, to be able to put himself in the mind of the killer and think like the killer. Well, I would submit that if you can't think like in the mind of a killer as an ordinary cop or a detective, you're in the wrong business. So I think that's a trope that has outworn its usefulness.
And I agree with that. And as an author of, I frequently have, actual psychological conditions that are discussed in the book. And I don't like to write criminals whose behavior is not explained by some history or by some condition. And so I actually consult with specialists in the field and make sure, and I have them read my manuscript, and I have them, make sure that I've connected the dots appropriately. But from when I was, working in civil litigation, the hardest thing I think was, we would have these forms and these Q&As, and the ability to forecast behavior from a questionnaire, from an assessment of someone's behavior before they've actually done anything criminal or even in a civil case that would, that would raise any red flags for us. That happens very frequently. Parties will ask for a psychological evaluation of the entire family, and it's really it's very difficult because the people who know that they're being asked these questions, they're reading into the questions, and they're second guessing their answers, and so they're like, oh wait, this is what I would answer, but if I answer that way, maybe it's a trick question, and maybe they're going to say I'm like a narcissist, or I have borderline personality disorder, or something. If I answer, and they try to actually back out the evaluation from the questions, and so they can get really skewed. That I think that's a big problem, and in my arena when I was practicing, that was a really difficult issue, and I feel like most of the psychological evaluations were just, you couldn't really rely on them, and the behavior that you would see later was not actually predicted by these evaluations. And certainly with children, I just wanted to touch on that as well, because we dealt with a lot of high conflict family situations where the children have been subjected to just an unhealthy environment and trauma, and seeing that behavior progress. There were signs you could start to see in children that were alarming, and as Catherine was saying, like, then trying to do preventative work becomes really important, but it's hard to pull those people into any kind of treatment or system when that behavior has not turned violent or criminal, but you can see it happening.
Right. Okay, just a quick interlude for those who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for me or the panel, send them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so this is something I've been thinking about for a while. So given the complex issues involving crime and violence and various roles of forensic psychology, do moral quandaries come up? You might want to, you can say, oh, I know such and such, oh, I know they're bad. And you kind of like, not so far as to say, planting evidence or manipulating, but is there a struggle for those who are on the forensic psychology side of it to sort of, are there ethical, moral struggles that you deal with when you're in those roles? I mean, I have to imagine it's being exposed to those kind of people and that kind of behavior consistently. It has to be just a challenge of your own sense of self. Catherine, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most difficult things for somebody in the field of forensic psychology or psychiatry is restoring somebody back to competence to be executed, for example.
Right. Oh, right.
That is as usually the work of a mental health professional, and it's certainly a questionable practice, but it's required that somebody be competent before they're executed. Sometimes that means some kind of drug therapy or other types of therapy. It's a difficult area, but also risk evaluation. The prediction of somebody might become violent can have moral quandaries to it, because it's a very difficult, it's probably one of the most difficult skills that psychologists are expected to have, is to be able to spot a dangerous person and say when or where they might actually become violent in the future. When you're trying to project into the future, everything in that person's life needs to remain the same, and that's rarely the case. And if you don't predict it correctly, you could be sending somebody into some kind of treatment that they don't belong in, or the other side, you could say, no, they're going to be fine, and then they go out and they harm somebody.
So I think that's very true, except in the case of somebody who's already committed violence, because we know statistically over and over and over again, past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. Now, we all know the formulation that it's better to let 100 guilty men go free than to imprison one innocent person. Well, of course, we all believe that, but at the same time, it's not that simple. You let 100 guilty people, particularly violent guilty people, go free, and how many innocent victims are you going to create that way? So Catherine's right. It's a very complex very complex equation to have to work out.
Do you think is there, I don't know, an instinct, an impulse to sort of, if you're the one doing an analysis and you're saying, you're kind of asking my opinion, do I think this person is a danger to others? Is there an impulse to say, to sort of hedge and to sort of protect yourself and say, or even to the risk against letting someone out back into the world and have them do violence? Is there an impulse to maybe just say, yeah, I think this guy could be bad news, even if you're not sure, just because
you
don't want the risk, you don't want the guilt on your hands in case you're wrong.
In the words of the late great forensic psychologist Stanton Samino, before somebody can be rehabilitated, he has to have been habilitated in the first place. So if you have somebody who was never habilitated and he is a violent offender, I think that letting him out of prison, and I could cite you hundreds and hundreds of examples of people who've been let out of prison after violent sexual assaults. And the one thing they learned from that previous experience is don't leave a living victim who can identify you.
Let me ask, so speaking.
So in other words, I think somebody who's committed multiple violent sexual offenses, I think it's unthinkable to let them out of prison.
And yet it happens. Why do you think
it happens? It happens all the time.
What I mean, is it just a systemic failure of the system? Is it an individual case? Like, what happens there?
All of the above. And to pick up on something else that Catherine said in terms of trying to evaluate people ahead of time, every detective or FBI profiler, FBI agent I know will say, if you're relying on us to solve your social problems, you're too late. You got to get them earlier.
Right. I'm sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that in that case, it's the law, it's the sentencing guidelines, it's the each state, the law is different in each state for different offenses, criminal offenses. There are federal offenses that apply to all states, but it's just, and it has been with sexual assault, it has been, an ongoing battle to make those offenses have longer penalties and also to have, remove the statute of limitations or to lengthen the statute of limitations so that crimes that were committed and not solved years before, can be prosecuted. And you can see that there's a pattern for someone. So it used to be that there was, 3 or 5 year statute of limitations on sexual assault. So someone who was caught today, having assaulted a woman, you could not, look back, even if someone then came forward from 10 years ago, there was a statute of limitations, and that could not be then piled on and to show that there was a repeat offender in that person. So, the laws are definitely, I think, right. And Mark, I don't know, tell me if your experience is different, but I think that is one area with sexual offense that definitely plays in.
Absolutely. I mean, there are at least 6 distinct typologies of rapists, and some of them, particularly if you get them early in their career, they can be rehabilitated. Some, the violent or sadistic rapist, I would never take a chance on trying to rehabilitate.
Do you think that, so those who are repeat sexual offenders, have when you analyze them, do you think that, are they aware? Do you think that part of their behavior is, even if I get busted, I know they're going to, I won't be in here forever, I'm going to get back out and try to do it again? Or is it just not, is it just sort of, does that happen?
The ladies may have different opinions, but I don't think most offenders even think about that. I mean, unless there's a policeman, a uniformed policeman standing right there, I don't think they think that much about. And I've talked to a lot of judges in criminal court cases. They say these people just don't think in those terms.
I agree, especially when they're really in the heat of it. That is not what matters, and often they're narcissistic enough to believe they're not going to get caught.
Right.
They're too clever to get caught, or they haven't been caught in the past, so they won't be caught
so
again.
the victim doesn't matter.
Right. Okay. So I've got a question. So what, if any, major breakthroughs have there been in recent years regarding forensic psychology?
Catherine?
Neuropsychology, the brain scans, the things that we're learning, especially about adolescent brains and juvenile vulnerabilities are things that we're learning that are having an impact on court decisions in terms of how juveniles are treated. But a lot of just, I guess, in the past 20 years, what we're doing now with brain scans and how that informs us about many of these disorders and what we might be able to do in terms of treatment. Really, I think that's been revolutionary.
If we can get to that point, I think that would be wonderful. Here in Washington, D.C., we've had an overwhelming number of armed carjackings in the city this year and last year, 2/3 of them committed by juveniles. Now, I'm sorry for these people. I know they've had terrible lives, but to me, always, the first priority is to get the dangerous people off the streets. So if it's a 12-year-old who's using a gun to commit a crime, I understand that he doesn't have good judgment, but I want him off the street for a good long time so he can't hurt anybody else.
Yeah, and I think well, one of the books that my first thriller that I wrote dealt with memory science, and I did a deep dive into that, and it's continued to progress since then. And I think that is incredibly fascinating to understand how our memories are for witnesses and for victims in particular, how our memories are impacted by our emotional state when events happen, by substances that are present when events happen, and also from the trauma and how they can be reconsolidated over time and be either lost and then recovered or become unreliable. And so that, I think, from the the legal perspective in terms of prosecuting, I think has become very complicated, and also the treatments for and this weighs into what we were talking about, what you both were talking about with children and with trauma, early childhood trauma that leads to criminal behavior and these sort of psychological conditions that become precursors perhaps for violent behavior later on. I think the study of trauma has been progressing and is really fascinating, and it opens up such a dilemma, as both of you were saying, that these children, they did not ask to be abused, neglected, subjected to trauma in their childhoods, and that had a profound impact structurally on their brains and how their brains are triggered and what will how they will think and feel and react to situations later on, and that might lead to to criminal behavior. And yet that behavior can't be condoned, but they in a sense are also victims, because
no question.
It's such a moral dilemma. It really is.
All right, fair enough. All right, that was great. But now for time for the show, where we're going to spin the wheel. On the wheel of 7 categories I created for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get, and the categories are CSI, Magic Mike, Q&A, Dinner is Served, Judge, Jury, and Dexecutioner, Secret Superstitious, and everyone's favorite Kick 'em in the Junk. All right, Catherine, you're new on the show, so you're up first. You ready?
I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
All
Just
right,
roll with it. Just roll with it.
All right, what do you got? So you got Magic Mike. All right, this is a new one on our show. You are suddenly and unexpectedly called on stage in front of thousands of inmates at the local penitentiary to sing. You're pretty nervous, but thankfully you are standing in front of a magic mic, which will give you awesome vocal powers for one night only. If you could sing like anyone in front of a room full of inmates, who would that be?
What song would I have, or what do you mean?
What singer? Whose voice would you like to have?
What singer would I be?
Yes.
For the record, I asked Russ if there were going to be any questions.
You did.
No.
That's it.
So you take your time, Catherine.
Grace Slick.
All right, that's a good. You can't go wrong. Okay, all right. You ready, Mark? You're up next. All right. All right, and what do we got for you? And we got, you had the same one. So Q&A. What do we got here today? Is another new one. All right. So, all right. You can safely interview any criminal from history to perform a forensic psychological analysis. Who would you choose?
Well, I guess you'd have to say Jack the Ripper, since he's sort of ground zero for the study of serial killers. From our research, we think we know on a book that Catherine actually helped us on, the cases that haunt us. We think we pretty much know who Jack the Ripper was, but I'd love to be able to interview him to see if that's true.
All right, fair enough. All right, Wendy, you're up. You ready?
No, but go ahead.
That's the best kind. All right, let's see. You got, all right, what do we got? Oh, here we go. Dinner is served. Dr. Hannibal Lecter has invited you over to dinner. Knowing his penchant for feeding his victims to unsuspecting guests, would you eat what looks like a delicious meal he prepared, knowing what might be in there? Or would you decline, fearing how he might take that rejection?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I would decline, and I would find a way to deflect and appease his ego that I turned down his meal. There you go.
And bring him a bottle of nice Chianti.
Oh, nice Chianti.
That's it.
Right, I'm making him hammered on Chianti first.
All right, I was waiting for that one. All right, okay, but now it's time we're going to pick your poison. I've got 4 choices for you: A, B, C, or D. I'm not going to tell you what's behind which one, but I will say that they're all related to tonight's topic. So what do you pick? A, B, C, or D? All right, Wendy, I'll let you go first.
Oh, all right. Let's go with C.
All right, we're going to put you in the writer's room. If you
Okay.
were invited into the writer's room for a new TV series where forensic psychology is central to the plot, what advice would you hope the showrunner would follow, or what requests would you have of them?
Oh, first and foremost, we would get Catherine or Mark to consult, and we get somebody in there who knew what they were
Oh,
talking
what a suck up.
about. No, we would
I'm
get-
just
no,
kidding. I'm just kidding.
No, honestly, the first thing I always do when I'm going to deal with anything that is supposed to be real is I actually consult with experts and find out, I tell them the whole plot. I tell them, what I want to accomplish, and they tell me what types of conditions or medications or whatever would actually realistically be involved in that crime. So that would be the first thing, would be to get the experts on board from day one before you get entrenched in a plot or character descriptions that you can't, dial back from.
That's
All
the
right.
best possible answer for a writer.
All right, there you go. Okay, all right, Mark, you're up next. So you got A, B, or D?
A, because I
A,
got so few of them in school.
All right, we're going to give you some truth serum. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Quick, you ready?
Yep.
Favorite fictional crime-related character?
Sherlock Holmes.
Cozy mysteries or hard-boiled detective stories?
Hard boiled.
Weirdest criminal case you ever worked on or heard about?
Let's see. Probably the Lindbergh case, because there's no good answer to it, even though there is an answer somewhere.
All right. Criminal case you wish you could have been a part of?
That one.
All right. Judge Judy or Judge Dredd?
Neither one.
Hypnotism or memory wipe?
Or memory what?
Memory wipe.
What is memory wipe?
Wipe your memory.
Oh, I don't set much store in either one.
All right. Data analysis or hands-on field work?
You need both.
All right. Who wins in a battle of wills between Hannibal Lecter and the Joker?
Probably the Joker, because he's got no guardrails at all.
All right. Favorite beverage to unwind with after a hard day dealing with criminals or their behavior?
Single malt scotch.
All right. Have you been involved with a case where a psychic was brought in to help with a crime? If yes, what was that like? And if no, and the police had run out of leads, would you consider it?
Yes, and psychics are generally pretty good at picking up on things like profilers. I don't think they're definitive on anything, but they can often help focus an investigation.
All right, Catherine, so get B or D?
D.
B as in boy?
D.
Oh,
as in
D.
dog.
All right. All right. So that's our advice column. So, all right. So what's the best? All right. So what's the best writing advice you can offer to our writers out there about writing forensic psychology into their fiction?
Get a good friend who will see you through the dark times and find a very good consultant who knows about actual forensic psychology, not what's in fiction.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so we're going to take some questions from the audience.
Can I say one thing before you do this, Russ? Because I
please.
think this is something that both of my colleagues here would agree with. The one thing that I would advise any writer is really focus on the victim. I mean, the victims are what's really important. That's why the whole thing happens. And the offender creates a relationship with the victim. The victim doesn't want that, but it's there. But we often in crime fiction movies focus on the wrong person, which is the offender. And any attempt to glamorize him or make him heroic, I think, is despicable.
All right, fair enough. All right. Once and for all, what is the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath?
I'm going to leave that to
I already
the
said that.
Yeah.
A psychopath has a diagnostic instrument by which you can make a diagnosis. A sociopath does not. Antisocial personality disorder has a diagnostic instrument. Sociopathy is from the 1950s, and it's still being used, but it is not as finely descriptive as either of the other two.
All right. So question. So the BTK serial killer didn't match any of the typical profiles. So are profiles more likely to work with unorganized killers?
I wouldn't say that's true. I mean, Catherine has done the interview, but from everything I know, I think BTK actually corresponded to a lot of them. And in fact, we did in one of our books, Obsession, I believe, we had a profile that was sort of based on BTK, and unbeknownst to us, Dennis Rader, before he was caught, read the book and ticked off what he thought applied to him and what he thought didn't.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So for Dr. Ramsland, have you assessed a criminal defendant for malingering or exaggerating symptoms of a mental illness? And if so, how common is such an assessment?
It's very assessing for malingering is part of every assessment, because you have to make sure that they aren't faking some disorder in order to, be acquitted or have a lesser sentence. So you're always watching for malingering. I couldn't give you a percentage for how often it happens. However,
all right.
I don't know.
So one question I wanted to ask before we didn't have time for. So I'm curious, and this is for all of us who are readers and authors. So either generally or specifically, in what ways do movies, TV shows, books accurately portray forensic psychology, and in which ways do they most consistently get it wrong?
I thought Mindhunter did a pretty good job.
I thought it was pretty good.
I would say in just as a viewer, and from what I know from writing and the research I've done to write is that oftentimes there's behavior that is not explained from any psychological standpoint, and that to me is always a huge hole in a story when someone is given what is clearly an illness that could be diagnosed, and that the criminal behavior is emanating from that. In other words, it's not just a rage attack, it's not just like a for money or whatever, but it's a true like illness, and it's not explained. And that bothers me a lot, because I think that that's the most fascinating thing about all of this, is how a person becomes psychologically impaired to the point of criminal behavior.
All right, folks. So now we're almost out of time, but I'm going to share my screen here. I got some goodies for you I think you guys are going to like. So hang on for just a second. Okay. So Wendy, so
yes.
what do we got?
Okay. So, I have two books that just came out this year. What Remains, which is not what's on the screen, was out in June. And that is, that's about a cold case detective, who is stalked by a man whose life she saves in the line of duty. This book is coming out on October 17th. It was first released as an Audible original. It is about a 17-year-old autistic girl who is caught in the crosshairs after her boss, who is also a ruthless local business owner, is found murdered. So it's a small town murder mystery. It's a thriller because our protagonist is in danger, and it is told through her eyes. So we get sort of a very interesting look through the eyes of a neurodivergent protagonist.
All right, great, fantastic. All right, Mark, talk to me.
Well, this is the first book. This is the one that started it all for me in this field. I'd written 4 novels, and I had been a documentary filmmaker. And this is the book that started my profiling path with John Douglas. And I think we're up to about 10 books now. The last one is When a Killer Calls. So Mindhunter, the basis for the Netflix series. This is the one that began it.
All right, so I'm going to say to everyone who's watching 2 things. First of all, I've read Mindhunter cover to cover, and I went through it extensively. If you, however great you think the show is, my opinion, the book's even better. It is absolutely brilliant and fascinating. It's maybe the greatest crime book I've ever read. One man's opinion. Secondly, if you want to get a deeper dive, I had Mark on the show about 2 years ago, and we did a full hour on Mindhunter. So I'll recommend, go to my YouTube channel, watch it. You're gonna love it. It is great. All right, Catherine, what do we got?
This is the second one in my fiction series, even though a lot of the things that I use in it are real. This is Annie Hunter is a forensic psychologist who runs a PI agency. The Nutcrackers is an agency that takes on hard nuts to crack. And the cases that I use are based on real cases that I've experienced. And the network of consultants that Annie Hunter uses are often based on people that I've worked with to try to solve crimes.
Wow, that is fantastic. All right, guys, that's 3 great books you should go get. And as for me, a little bit different from these guys. This is the 4th novel in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled private eye Angela Hardwick. In my mind, Hardwick is part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, and part Sarah Connor. And Blunt Force Rising. So Hardwick and her partner Eric Whistler are providing extra security on a Galaxy cruise ship. So just a cruise ship, except rather than the ocean, it's up in space. For an AI, robotics, and cybernetics conference. But that event quickly devolves into a bitter argument between the pro-Android and the anti-Android community. And for me, androids in this book are a surrogate for any marginalized group who seem to engender all sorts of hate from people who can't really seem to rationally articulate where the hate comes from or why it seems to consume them so much, whether it's
Let me just say, Russ's books have the greatest covers, I've always said. And on your next show, next time we're invited on, do we get to psychologically profile androids?
Sure, why not? Let's do it. And thank you for that plug, Mark. Anyway, on this cruise ship, a murder takes place on board. It sets off a chain of events that's even more horrific than even Hardwick has seen. And when it's all done, it's safe to say that Hardwick and Whistler will never be the same. Also, this is a locked room mystery thriller. So if you're in the mood for some close quarters mayhem with some real philosophical discussions about who has rights, who doesn't, and why, this one's for you. Blunt Force Rising is on sale now. And in the meantime, I'll encourage you to check out the first 3 books in the series, Crackle and Fire, Fractured Lives, and Hot Ash. And I want to be clear, all the books in the series are standalone mysteries. So you can read them in any order. It does not matter. I reintroduce the world building and the characters each time, but there is some character development throughout, so your mileage may vary. All right, Blunt Force Rising and the rest of the series is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, folks, I want to thank everyone. That's our show. I want to thank my friends. We got Mark and Catherine and Wendy for coming out here and talking forensic psychology with us. And I want to thank everyone else who's out there who took their time to watch and hang out. I hope you had a great time. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow me on social media and subscribe to my YouTube channel. All is free. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. As always, be kind, be generous, and generous of spirit. And I'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye now.